Girl, real talk. This whole "it's new year, time to reinvent myself" trash is not the vibe for 2024. You can find someone who loves you for you, as you are. You don't need to read a stack of self-help books, only eat sad salads, or start meditating at 5 a.m. to be ready for dating. So yeah, my advice is to download Bumble and find someone who embraces you the way you are right now. Let me know how it goes.
Hello and welcome to Outward, Slate's most happily queer infested podcast. I'm Bryan, an editor at Slate. We're back this week with another round of advice for all of our beloved LGBTQs out there. Thanks to those of you who sent in letters. That was really great to see in our inbox this week. Listeners, please follow that example and send us more. We're going to be doing this regularly, so the more of your problems, whether they're low stakes or high drama, that we get, the more useful and maybe sometimes even entertaining, I don't know, this will be. As always, we love to hear your voices, so send voice memos if you can, but letters are also okay. Send those to outwardpodcast@slate.com. Okay, today I'm joined by two excellent co-advisors. The first is Danny Lavery, who you already know, but just in case, was Slate's Dear Prudence from 2016 to 2021, and just generally a sage about the internet, I would say. And we also have my wonderful Slate audio colleague and writer, Madeline Ducharme, who is a producer on Slate's excellent daily news show, What Next? If you're not listening to What Next, go subscribe to that right now. Hey, everybody, how are you doing?
I'm good. It's snowing. It's beautiful out.
It is snowing, yeah.
I'm thrilled to be here. I'm a longtime listener of both Outward and Slate's advice podcasts and the advice universe, so I'm excited to be here.
The advice universe, yeah. Danny, how are you?
I'm doing great. I also, I feel like the last couple of years, every year we get snow later in the season, and so it was such a just relief to be like, okay, this isn't the first winter with no snow, which is a line I'm sure we'll cross soon, but it's nice to know that it's not going to be this year.
Yeah.
Jesus. Yeah, no, there's something kind of soothing to my, climate change anxiety or whatever, depression, whatever that's called, to see this at least for one day. Maybe that snow spirit will inflect the tone of the podcast today with a little lightness and glittery beauty.
Mm-hmm. Sparkle.
Sparkle, a little sparkle. That's what we need. Well, I think it's time for us to get into these letters. We've got a pretty interesting set today. Some of them are kind of thorny. Some of them are not. And one's kind of like this brief but philosophical query. So I'm excited to talk with y'all about that. We will dig into all of those right after the break.
Girl, real talk. This whole "it's new year, time to reinvent myself" trash is not the vibe for 2024. You can find someone who loves you for you, as you are. You don't need to read a stack of self-help books, only eat sad salads, or start meditating at 5 a.m. to be ready for dating. So yeah, my advice is to download Bumble and find someone who embraces you the way you are right now. Let me know how it goes.
Attention shoppers, we now have taste in the bread aisle. Dave's Killer Bread. That's right, an organic bread that's no longer a snooze for your taste buds. Dave's Killer Bread is on a mission to make the most of the loaf, to rid the world of GMOs, high fructose corn syrup, and artificial ingredients, and plant the seeds of good in all that they bake. Killer taste, killer texture, and always organic. Dave's Killer Bread. Bread amplified.
Welcome back. We're here for a Outward Advice episode. We're going to jump right into our first question, which comes to us from Facial Faux Pas. Hi, Outward team. I've never been the best with recalling names and faces, but have typically managed just fine until very recently. A couple of years ago, I got a less common facial piercing and suddenly stand out from a crowd considerably more than I had grown used to. On top of this, the subcultures and groups I participate in are fairly niche, but with large and interconnected audience. Lots of friends of friends of friends, and a few enemies, but that's neither here nor there. I keep getting into trouble with my inability to recognize people I have had half a conversation with one time 6 months ago. I can can all relate to that. But they still greet me by name when we bump into each other again because of that piercing. Any tips for remembering names and faces better, or at least graceful ways to ask someone to remind you their name for the third time in as many years? Thanks. I just want to start by saying we chose this question. I know it's not exactly like a queer question, but I do think this issue can come up in queer circles more often because they are smaller, right? And these sort of subcultures that the letter writer describes, I think could be thought of as queer. Some of those are probably queer. It certainly happens to me with like gay guys all the time.
Yeah.
So anyway, what do y'all think about this question?
I just very much like the idea that there are straight ways to forget someone's name and gay ways to forget someone's name. I think that's broadly true. And like similarly, especially if you're in a number of small like niche subgroups, there's maybe more of an expectation of emotional intimacy. And so in a sort of like, I'm at my corporate job and there's a sort of like presumed heterosexual culture washing over all of us. It's, no one's favorite to be asked for their name, but it's understood. Whereas like this person I like see at board game night twice a year really thinks of me as family. And so I have to tread carefully.
Yeah. This facial piercing thing is funny because I think like in a lot of queer spaces, it would just make you further fit into the crowd. So I'm like, what are you piercing? Like which part of your face? But one thing that I noticed about this is that this person seems to have a very active social life. And I was like, hell yeah, you go. That's awesome. And I think one thing that sort of rarely has failed me in the social context of not remembering someone's name is that you bring over somebody who you do know the name of and you introduce them. 9 out of 10 times, that person whose name you can't remember will say, oh, hey, it's so good to meet you. I'm ta-da, there's the name. Sometimes they don't though. So you got to be ready for when that happens and it can be weird. But in terms of remembering people's names and faces better, I don't really know if I have a good go-to like tactic or strategy.
I was thinking often at certain kinds of press events, the publicists will give you like a sheet with everyone who's going to be there, at least everyone important who's going to be there, their faces and their names. I often find myself like wanting that at parties. I suffer from this so much. Like I really just have a very bad memory for faces. And so you're not going to be given that. I mean, what I thought when reading this was like, a lot of people struggle with this to some degree, and I think they're maybe not as upset by it as the letter writer is thinking. I hope not. Like, I hope people are not so wrapped up in their, in their
That's true.
needing to be called by their names all the time to get upset about this. So maybe, be less hard on yourself, I would say. Madeline, what you said is so true. The eavesdropping or like the asking someone else, the little triangulation you described, I think I do that often. I think it can be really helpful. But if you I was trying to think of kind of like a script, when you get to that moment where there's just no other, way to get around it, I really think it's okay to be like, oh gosh, I'm so sorry. I know we've met, but I'm just blanking on your name. Could you please remind me? I think that's fine. Like most people are going to be happy to tell you their name, are not going to hold a grudge. I don't think. Just be honest. And maybe, to what Danny was saying, like that, the presumed emotional intimacy of some of these spaces, some of them queer spaces, maybe allows for a little more honesty about like failings. I don't know.
Do you think you could study up on Instagram before you go too? Sometimes, if there are photos from like the last gathering, just like doing a quick search and looking at people can be annoying about their usernames though, especially queers. Queers are all like, my username is fresh boiled eggs, and you're like, that's not your name.
There are so many people whose like Instagram handle is their name in my mind, and it's like, nope, that's not.
Yes,
right. That's not actually their names. I can't say that out loud. Yeah, I guess you could. I don't know, Danny. Do you have any like practical thoughts about this?
I think so. Yeah. So it wasn't totally clear to me if this was all happening at like social gatherings or if they were bumping into people on the street. So I agree. If this is like at a friend's get together, absolutely ask your friend before you head over. Remind me of, X, Y, or Z people. I think I would have either one of two suggestions. One is, this can sound a little bit goofy, but like if you keep a little cursory diary and just happen to like sketch down, it could also be interesting to revisit later, like a cool diary of people you bump into. and just do something quick, like saw this person, they know that person, they were wearing a green coat.
Yeah.
Obviously, don't go Harriet the Spy and like start recording like unpleasant personal characteristics. But that's one possibility, especially if you're just hoping to sort of strengthen your memory for faces and people. It won't be perfect necessarily, but it'll help to sort of embed those grooves into your memory better. The other, I think, is either you can just have a pleasant conversation if you see someone like waiting for the bus for a few minutes and don't worry about getting their name. The other is if you are going to ask, I would say do it right away. Don't do it halfway through the conversation. Because again, like we've all been saying, none of this is a huge deal, but it is possible, even if someone's really reasonable, to feel a little bit slighted if they think you don't think I'm memorable. So I understand why you feel it's important, even though you're aware it's not like mortal insults. Do it immediately and keep your apology brief. Because I think people are maybe inclined to do a big song and dance of like, I really apologize. Because what they want to communicate is, I'm really sorry. It's not your fault. It's not that you're not memorable. But the longer it gets, the more it can feel sort of like unintentionally diva-ish, like, oh darling, I just can't be bothered to remember these things. It's like, remember that character in Bleak House who's always saying, I'm a child in such matters. And so you just run the risk of sounding a little bit like, don't expect me to remember your name, I simply can't. Again, so just say like, I'm so sorry, would you remind me your name? And don't go into details about how hard faces are for you. Because I think someone would just feel a lot easier about, great, we're having a quick back and forth. You're not going into great detail about the like Blanche Dubois weaknesses of your mind, where you must be like borne aloft on a litter and like reminded constantly.
And I do think the fact that this person wrote in means that they have this self-awareness about this. And I kind of think it might like in part solve the problem. Like you'll just pay closer attention because you're aware of the fact that this is a problem for you, so much so that you wrote in to strangers to ask for
don't over apologize or over explain. Just say, I'm so sorry, would you remind me your name? And then carry on with the conversation and be friendly.
Facial faux pas. You are not a child in such matters. I love this idea of a little diary. I think I might take that up myself. It sounds kind of sexy to like have that around.
It's very like Gilded Age, like that TV show. It just seems like the kind of thing that they would do.
No, I love that. I love that idea.
Yeah, and like just calling it like My Encounters.
Yeah, My Encounters. That's great. That's a great idea, Danny. Thank you. All right, Madeline, do you want to share our next letter with us?
Sure, absolutely. This one is a little bit heavier, so bear with us because it's a little bit harder. Dear esteemed panel of judges, which is a funny way to address Outward, but also dear Outward podcast. I'm a 30-something lesbian who grew up in an abusive household. I'm estranged from my parents and some of my siblings and only came out to 3 members of my family. Beyond the desire never to talk to or see either of my parents again, on some petty level, I feel like they don't deserve to know anything about my life as it is now. I'm very proud of overcoming the first 2 decades of my life and feel immensely blessed with the life I'm able to lead now. Whenever people ask about my parents, I'm quite upfront about the fact that I don't talk to them. If there are follow-up questions, I simply explain that they are bad people and I'm at peace without them in my life. If people keep pushing and I'm not comfortable disclosing my past, I sometimes lie and say that it's because they're homophobic. This needless prying only ever comes from heterosexual tone-deaf people who quickly change the subject after gayness comes up, which is perfect. I feel very emotionally conflicted about this lie, and I don't want to appropriate the unique trauma of being rejected or abandoned for your queer identity. Should I just lie and tell people that my parents are deceased? I worried that any starter lie, like they are dead or I still talk to them, will create a continuous need for subterfuge. Subterfuge, good word use. I also don't want to offend people and found the more people pry, the worse they take the request to back the F off. Even after therapy and distance, just talking about my parents still kicks off a stress response in my nervous system that makes it hard to think straight in these uncomfortable moments. Basically, my question is, does this make me a bad person? And do I need to stop using this crutch lie? From The Parent Trap.
Ooh.
All right. Yeah. It's hard.
Because it took me a minute to totally understand what was happening in this letter, so I just want to maybe pull out a few things for listeners. The lie is, the letter writer does not speak to their parents, doesn't want to talk about their parents. People are asking about their parents or just asking about, your family. And they have been lying, saying that the reason they don't talk is homophobia, when in fact it was just abuse. Like it wasn't homophobia per se that was happening.
Right.
But it was
because they weren't out.
They weren't out yet. They weren't out.
But also, it's interesting that it's the lie only comes up a couple of degrees in.
Yeah.
So somebody will say, what are your parents like? Oh, I don't talk to them. Oh, why don't you talk to them? They're bad people. Oh, how are they bad people? And then the lie comes up. So it takes a little bit of time to get there in terms of how they're breaking this down.
Yeah.
My first reaction when I read this is the idea of swapping in this "they are dead" starter lie is a bad idea.
Yeah.
Don't do that. I think that is going to beget more questions.
Yeah.
It almost always does. And I say that as somebody who's one of my parents died when I was 18. And so all it does is beget questions. And then you're going to end up spiraling out and you're going to feel the stress response. And then you're going to get, it's not a good idea. So don't do that.
I could picture, I feel the same way. It was, I was like, if homophobia as the lie is making you feel bad or icky, I was like, I don't think death is going to make you feel better. And
it's worse.
As you just said, it sets up this possibility for some kind of like Curb Your Enthusiasm spiral of just like ridiculousness. Like I can just see that going in so many bad directions. So I don't think you want to substitute that in. Curious to hear what y'all think, but I don't know that we want a lie at all. I think we want to move away from the lying, but what do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I kind of wish I knew a little bit more about, like, is this coming up when people are like broadly talking about family at work or like making small talk at a party or friends of friends? Because in some of those situations, my advice would be not to share the fact that you're estranged from your family. Certainly I can appreciate that it is not appropriate or polite of people to like continue asking follow-up questions when you're sort of making it clear you don't want to go into detail. But I also want to be easy on these people.
Right.
For better or for worse, people's family is a part of small talk conversation in a lot of contexts. And it's, it's still a big ticket item, family estrangement. And so people are naturally curious when they hear about it. Again, that doesn't mean every question anybody asks you is like reasonable or that you're, doing something wrong. I just think that it's a lot to ask someone you don't know very well to handle. So, for example, I don't bring up the fact that I am estranged from my family in plenty of small talk conversations. If family is coming up, I will either... it's not that often that people will say directly to me, like, where's your sister today? But I might certainly just say whatever's quickest. Like I wouldn't out and out lie, but if someone asks me how many siblings I have, I'll say 2. I don't say 2, but we don't speak.
Right.
Just 'cause
Right.
again, like that's a lot of pressure to put on a light social tie. And so I think the way that might help you to reframe some of this is to think about, how can I make this conversation easier for the person I'm talking to, instead of getting an antagonistic sense of this person's trying to pry something out of me. And so just think, what's the truest thing I could say that would place the least amount of burden on you? So I think maybe to that end, if it comes up in such a way where it's totally unavoidable, I would maybe just say something like, we're actually not close, and then kind of try to move on to the next part of the conversation and don't go into detail about it. Don't make it sound like there's some big dark secret behind it. Just sort of like, we're pretty scattered, or I come from a pretty small family, or just we're not in a ton of contact, and then whatever else you're talking about, kind of lean into that, so that there's just a sort of gentle shepherding away, rather than we don't talk, but don't ask me any questions, which again is an understandable desire. I don't mean to make it sound like that's too much, but it's a lot. It's tough.
Yeah. I do think you made a good point, Danny, which is that I think the people who are asking more questions are worried about appearing callous.
Yes.
They don't just want to move on after you've said something that's like, I think bums them out and makes them feel bad for you, I think like somebody hears, oh, you're estranged. And if I were to say, oh, I'm estranged from this family member, and the other person were to just be like, oh, cool, moving on, like that would also probably feel kind of bad.
Right.
And I think that these people are trying to be generous with you, and they're trying not to be callous. So maybe that reframing can help. The other thing is that back to the question of the appropriation of a specific kind of trauma, I do think this person's not being gentle enough with themselves and like tender enough with themselves about the things that they've lived through. They seem to be really proud of all they've overcome. And I actually
felt,
yeah. And I actually think that you shouldn't worry that the trauma you gesture towards, that like does the job, that, you know, ends the conversation in the way that you want to, is not exactly precisely your trauma. Like, I don't really think that that's a huge deal. So if you want to keep doing this little lie to get people to stop talking at the, you know, point that you're describing it coming up, I think that's like morally fine. I think we all do like weird lies to move along in our day. And it sounds like that's kind of what you're using it for. And you also did live through something really hard. And so I don't think you should dismiss that. But maybe you both disagree. I don't know.
No, I think, and, you know, I mean, one thought I had was, like, literally homophobia wasn't necessarily a part of that decision, but it seems like likely that it would have been. I don't know, you know, but it seems unlikely that family members described here as abusive. We don't have all the details, of course, but I don't think we need them. I think it's likely that they would also be homophobic, right? I don't think that you're like appropriating too far, letter writer. I love what you've both said, because I think I approached this. I was going to say something to the effect of like, the people doing this are really rude to you, but actually I'm convinced by the idea that they're most likely trying to be gentle and generous and trying to like not feel callous toward your letter writer, your experience. So that is a helpful reframing. I do think, though, if you try all of the great ideas that Danny and Madeline have shared and people still keep pressing, I think it is okay to get to like a place of, I appreciate your interest, but I don't want to talk about this anymore.
Yeah.
You can shut it down, right? Like, if somebody's really being nosy and it doesn't feel genuine in the way that y'all have been talking about, I think having that language is also fine. And just to reiterate, I think not giving any points of curiosity will help with this. So saying that they are bad people is a point of curiosity, right? That makes me want to know in what way are they like. So it's not that that's your fault, but it's just something to think about. Keeping, and Danny said this, keeping it as like kind of flat as possible will probably reduce the number of times people are trying to dig and help you get away from these conversations faster.
You know, keep it boring, right?
To be clear, if somebody says I'm estranged from my family, and it's not someone you know very well, the polite thing is just to say some variation of, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that," and like allow the conversation to keep moving.
Totally.
So to be clear, I don't want to say like, "Oh yeah, what they're doing is great," but I think of it as a little bit like, because these are clearly not close friends. These are people that you don't know very well.
Yeah.
And when you don't know someone very well, there's only so many rules that govern polite and appropriate conversation. And when you introduce something like family estrangement, it's a little bit like everyone is now in the deep end and they don't really know what they're doing. So again, that doesn't mean you've done something wrong. You're just acknowledging the truth. You didn't invent the idea of family estrangement. But I do think it really helps to think, like, what they're trying to do in that conversation is get back to politeness and safety and agreement. And so what they're trying to do is acknowledge, like, I'm really sorry. If I were estranged from my family, I would feel really sad. I would want something that could recuperate it. Like, maybe things will get better someday. Or maybe, like, again, if they had some time to think it through, they probably wouldn't say those things, because they'd realize, like, actually implying that maybe someday it'll get better, or you'll realize you've misunderstood something, kind of makes you seem like a fool. But they're just trying to get to a place where things feel safe and nice. And so don't put them into this place where you know they can't swim. And so do what you have to keep them in the shallow end, which is, again, that's what polite conversation is for. It's to stay in the shallow end for this very reason, because it is difficult to talk about huge, big ticket items unless you know someone pretty well. Yeah, I think just like, we don't happen to be close, but I've got some really wonderful friends in the city, and we have wonderful holiday traditions. And actually, maybe you met one of them, Mark. We get together every weekend, and now you're safe again because you're talking about people you like, and you can move back into that.
All right, Parent Trap, I think that is some good advice. We hope it's helpful. And now we're going to take a break, but we'll be right back with questions after that. All right, welcome back. We are here doing an Outward Advice episode, and we're on to the next question.
All right, so this next one is a 3-year-old post to the relationship advice subreddit. So whatever this original person decided to do has long since happened. But we just get to sort of interestingly speculate, which is always fun. The subject is, overheard my stepdaughter talking to her friends about being queer. Would like to express support without letting her know I've heard. Title pretty much covers it. My tween stepdaughter was hanging out with some friends a couple of weeks ago and was talking to them about a girl she liked at school. She's not come out to anyone in the family, and I've not told anyone, and don't intend to. I would love to be able to express to her that we of course love her no matter who she loves, but I'm not exactly subtle most of the time. So has anyone had a similar experience? Maybe someone wished they'd heard something from their parents before coming out, maybe don't say anything at all and it's just business as usual. Just interested to know how others might approach this. Thanks. And then there's an edit at the bottom that says, I really appreciate all the thoughtful answers. It's given me some confidence in moving forward. Consensus is to just wait until she's ready while being mindful of my own language and actions in the meantime. Thanks. That's really sweet.
Yeah, this is so sweet.
This is so sweet.
Yeah. It comes up so much, and one of the things I do at Slate is edit some of Care and Feeding, our parenting advice column, and this situation has come up a number of times, and it's always so sweet to hear the parent wanting to do the right thing, right? Like, and being sensitive to that. Yeah, I don't know, Madeline, what do you think about it?
Okay, one, I really liked the self-awareness of this person who wrote said, I'm not exactly subtle most of the time. Because I do think somebody who is not subtle but didn't have that self-awareness would have immediately been like, you got any crushes, boys, or perhaps girls, and so I'm glad that they have that self-awareness. I also would say that like the thing that this gives you is just time to prepare for the conversation when the tween stepdaughter does want to have it. And I think that that's a huge blessing because I think a lot of parents don't have that. And then what happens is you end up reacting and responding in real time in a way that like maybe is, even if somebody is not a like raging bigot, they can make weird faces or respond in weird ways.
Nervous. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like if somebody is in this situation, they have been given like a little gift that is a ton of time to be thoughtful about this and maybe even talk to, queer friends to say like, what's the thing that you wanted to hear in your coming out conversation? I have like, I want to make sure I do this right. If any of my stepkids ever come out, you don't need to mention any of this thing that you heard. Just like, it's a way to like start gathering data and gathering the like, not right phrases, but the things that are going to be gentle and thoughtful and tender. So yeah, obviously wait, but build your little arsenal of love.
I love that idea. I'm just thinking about what it is like to be, I'm trying to put myself back, in the headspace before I came out to my parents. And even if your parents are sort of politically, in the right area to seem like they'd be supportive or whatever, being in that, I don't even call it a closet exactly, but like in that headspace before you decide to share that information, things can just seem really scary and you can be very like on guard. And even like positive gestures or gestures intended to be positive, I think could read as upsetting or threatening or something because you're in this, it's a private thing for a while, right? And you're still figuring it out. So I would be wary of like even, you can imagine someone suddenly buying like, I don't know, rainbow paper towels or something like in the house just to like start signaling that like, oh, like, yeah, like
don't do that.
Resist the urge to like put on, Love Simon every night. Right. Like that I think is just maybe I'm sure there are some tweens that would respond well to that, but I think a lot of people are going to find that like confronting, even though it's intended.
They're going to feel like they've been found out.
Yeah.
Right?
And I don't think you want to make it feel like exactly like a dirty secret in any way. And so that's why it's important to wait. And yeah, I love this idea of sort of preparing yourself so that you're ready to have that conversation with as much information and sort of self-comfort as possible. Yeah, but this is so lovely that the Reddit poster is asking this because I think they're going to be in such a great position.
Yeah, I think this is really lovely. I think the only thing that I would add is the possibility that this is only a possibility, but if this was a conversation that your stepdaughter was having in the house, it doesn't sound like the step parent was like reading their text messages or like listening in on a call like made outside the house. Consciously or not, it's possible that she brought this up because she sort of wanted to be overheard as a sort of way of just like testing the waters or like not being afraid to talk about it kind of semi-openly in the house. Again, that doesn't mean you should go say, hey, I heard what you said. Just like, it sounds like she's at least on some level trying to sort of test the waters of, if I talk about being queer in the house, like, how does that feel? And so to that end, again, I agree. I don't think like it never makes anyone feel great to hear, I overheard your phone call and I have some thoughts. And it's okay that it's not always going to be subtle, because some of just like letting a pre-teenager know that like you'd be cool if they came out to you is like, of course that's going to be a little corny no matter how you phrase it. But I think to just, again, don't single her out, especially if there's other kids in the house, but to like slightly more often mention like the existence of queer people that you know, or, you know, as you discuss something, the possibility of, you know, and some people like men and some people like women and some people like both. And sometimes there's more than that. Again, like it will sound cheesy. It will sound like an after school special. That's fine. But just to generally sort of make it known, like, I think about queer people. If you bring it up to me, you will not be the first time someone has ever mentioned that. I think about this independently and positively, and don't do it more than like, I don't know, once a month.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Let's move to our final question, which is a very brief one, but perhaps a profound one. I don't know. I was just kind of amused by it, so I thought we could take a crack. Dear Outward, why do gay men marry and have kids? And this is from Simple and Free. So that maybe says something about the letter writer's position. Why do gay men marry and have kids? I think we can expand that to queer people if we want. I don't think it has to be just about gay men, but why do we marry and have kids? I have some thoughts, but please jump in.
I was just thinking, like, we certainly could expand it, but the sort of like, because I obviously read in a lot to this because there's only so much to read, especially with Simple and Free. The implication I got was sort of like, well, of course, like gay women marry and have kids because that's what women want to do. It's natural. It's normal. Women want to have kids, whether they're gay or straight, but men don't have to, and frankly shouldn't really want to. And if you have two men, that should be like almost zero desire for kids. There's no women around the place making you do it. So why bother? And I also, if I were to read a little further, I would wonder if somebody's ex had recently married someone and had a kid and they were feeling a little betrayed.
Yeah.
A little bit of like, I thought we were all going to do like cool, fun stuff together.
Simple and free.
Yeah. And now a bunch of men are marrying and having kids with other men. They might as well be straight. Why am I being left behind? Again, possibly that's not all that's going on. Certainly possible it's someone incredibly homophobic and not also gay. But that was my sort of read.
I love the backstory. Yeah, I think the Simple and Free made me think that it was not just a troll. I think you're right. I think it was like a question from someone living a different lifestyle who is in the community but concerned. I wanted to answer, two parts, not just have kids, but marry first. So I thought we should address that. I mean, in my experience, it is of course somewhat about love, but I think a lot of people are doing it in our community because we live in a system where legal and economic benefits and protections accrue to marriage that are difficult to pass up. And for better or worse, it just makes sense. So we have talked for decades about that, and we could talk about it for a long time here. But I think that is one reason, or a big reason, of why gay men are getting married. The kids part, I as a personal note, I think one great thing about being gay is that it was not until recently expected and it's not very easy for me to have kids. And I'm happy with that. Like, that is something that I do enjoy about being gay. But obviously, many gay couples that I know personally find great joy in child rearing, just like straight people do. They just want to have a certain kind of family life, right? Like, and they should be allowed to have it. And I don't know, like earlier in my youth, I would have maybe brought in like the scary word assimilation into this or something. At this point, I don't know. I just think people should be able to do what they want, Like I think I've let that go. And I don't think anybody is wrong for wanting to do that, to have children. Adoption seems noble to me if you do want that, but whatever, it's not really my business, and people like to have families, Some of us do enjoy being simple and free and living that life, but a lot of people find great meaning in family. I don't know.
So what's interesting is that, like, marry and have kids is sort of like one word here. It's sort of one action. Marry and have kids. But I almost think it's like you did, Bryan, useful to break down the like discrete parts. One, marrying. I also think people like to throw parties.
Yes.
I think people like to have a big, big party that is all about them and all about their love and how profound it is and how nobody's ever loved in the way that they've loved before. I think that that's sweet and special. And sometimes marrying is as much about the like legal economic benefits and also about the, I want to have a day of attention about our love. Like, that's really fun. This is the socially acceptable way to do it. You can't really force like 150 people that are close to you to like recognize your love to this degree, where they all dress up and drink nice champagne and travel very far. Like, this is the way to do that. And it's completely socially acceptable, and you don't sound crazy for asking for that. So that's one thing.
Yeah.
People want to throw a party, and gay people love to throw parties. We're very good at it.
That is
it
true.
makes sense that we would want to have parties. In terms of having kids, this is interesting because it makes it sound like the kids always follow the marriage, and that's not true. A lot of people have children, and then they end up gay married, and then they're gay parents, and they maybe didn't realize that they were going to be when they first had children. I've seen statistics before about queer parenthood in the US, and actually the states with the like largest amount of queer parents per capita or whatever are in the South. And it's a lot of people who marry young and then get divorced and then have children from their first marriages and end up, in queer relationships with children. And so maybe that's how they end up having kids. I also think the idea that like it's like marry and then have kids excludes the like existence of people who raise children as part of a community. And like that's actually a way to live your simple and free lifestyle while also having kids. So I think this person, it's possible that the simple and free is not necessarily shade. Maybe it's somebody who can't foresee a future where they can have these things and still be simple and free. But I do think lots of people do it. I feel like Dan Savage has made an entire career about being simple and free and also being married and having kids. So it's possible. I don't know. My girlfriend lives next door to this couple. At least I think they're a couple, but they also seem to have, there's sometimes like 4 or 5 adult men that kind of come and go from this house, as far as I've seen, just observing. And they have 2 very small children. And it seems that they're all taking care of them.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
I think that like there are ways to be married. There are ways to have kids that are some completely different than the like marry and have kids, like single word, single action thing that we're describing here. Right. So that was my response to it. Perhaps a bit more generous than the way you two read it, which was about.
Mine wasn't generous at all.
Yeah.
To be clear, mine was rude.
All right. Is that about all we have to say?
I think so.
I think to me, this one just felt sort of like the implied thing was because they don't have to, as if the only reason anyone does this kind of thing is because they've been brainwashed by society,
right?
And therefore, it's
or
just
biology,
and biologically married.
It's
just encoded. I don't know. It's worth giving some thought to. Most people eventually do. Not everyone, but most people do. So like have some curiosity about like a thing that most people do at some point in their lives. Like maybe there's like meaningful levels of like desire and values wrapped up in it. Doesn't mean you have to like it or approve of it or think they ought to be doing it. Just like it's always a little bit defensive when somebody tries to describe something that's very common in like, do you remember like when there was like a sort of very online contingent of like vocally child-free people who would refer to like babies and children as like crotch fruit or just like the most like gross or like reductive way. And it's just sort of like, all right, man, that sounds pretty defensive. It sounds like you really want to try to like make something that a lot of people do for meaningful reasons sound nuts.
Yeah.
And, like, good luck to you, but I don't think it's going to catch on. Not least because it's like, what makes adults different from children? It's just that time has passed. You yourself are still this thing.
Former child.
It's just such a weird
Former child, yeah.
People hate kids. People hate kids, and it's really sad.
Yeah, it bums me out.
Not that means you then have to have them or raise them. Just like find a way to talk about not wanting to have children and experiencing social pressure that does not put the blame on children. It's like the children aren't the one being weird to you about getting married and having kids. They're just trying to be alive, and they have no power. So like, be nice about them.
Be nice to the
It's
kids.
true.
Yeah.
It's true. I also think that the question of why, because they want to. That's why. I think it's funny, Danny, you made the case that lots of people are thinking about why these things happen, like this letter writer. But I also think a lot of people just do these things and never once think, why would I want to do this? They just do it. And that's also wonderful. And I think with a growing queer population, you're going to get more people who don't think too hard about their queer life, and they just do the things that they've always thought they were going to do in life, and they don't think about what it means to be queer and doing those things. They just do them, and that's beautiful to me. I think that's great. I
love not thinking about things.
Yeah.
Love not thinking about things, which in a way sounds simple and free. Simple and free. We hope that, assuage some of your curiosity about this, and we hope you continue being simple and free if that's what you want to do, or have a child if that's what you want to do. You can write back to us and let us know. That is all the time we have for advice today, but it's so much fun. We are going to be doing it more often, probably monthly. So please send us your questions. We need them. We want to hear directly from you. So send those, again, via voice memo or email to outwardpodcast@slate.com. You can always send us feedback or topic ideas at outwardpodcast@slate.com or via Facebook or X @SlateOutward. Just a reminder, as always, that by joining Slate Plus, you'll get ad-free podcasts, extra segments on shows like Working, and you will never ever hit a paywall on the Slate site. To learn more about that, you can go to slate.com/outwardplus. Our show was produced by Palace Shaw, the wonderful Palace Shaw. If you like Outward, please subscribe in your podcast app. Tell everybody about it, friends, family, lovers, children, so that they can rate and review the show and others can find it. For now, that's it. Bye, Danny.
Thanks so much.
Bye, Madeline. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thanks, Bryan. Thanks, Danny.
Stay gay, everybody.
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.